Okay, let's dive into some really intense source material this week. We're looking at week 5 of the Sean Diddy Combs trial.
Yeah, and specifically, the focus seems to be this marathon testimony from a key witness, Jane Doe.
Right. And the sources, they really dig into the details about her relationship with Mr. Combs. It's fascinating, but also often contradictory stuff emerging.
Definitely contradictory
Yeah.
about the relationship, the events, everything that's central to these allegations.
And then there was that, well, almost bizarre moment the reports mention Kanye West showing up.
Yeah, that was unexpected. Just a brief appearance, but it certainly cut through the legal arguments for a moment.
So for this deep dive, our mission is basically to unpack what the testimony and the reports are telling us, try to get a handle on the different stories the prosecution and defense are presenting.
Can see what light, this very personal testimony sheds on the whole complex situation.
Okay, so let's start right there. Jane Doe on the stand. How did the sources describe her presence, her demeanor?
Well, the picture painted was one of intense emotion, visibly upset, crying at times is what the reports said. And during cross-examination, it sounded like a real tug-of-war. She sometimes struggled with direct answers, apparently gave some quick retorts.
So pretty fraught.
Yeah, even needed the judge to step in sometimes. It sounds like reliving it all was, well, incredibly difficult for her.
And the prosecution, their whole approach seemed built around this theme of Diddy's alleged use of, well, power and money.
Exactly. They were trying to show how he allegedly leveraged his status, his influence, to control women, and Jane Doe specifically.
They highlighted the financial side.
Oh, yeah, big time. Things like $10,000 a month for her rent, paid directly by him, veneers, expensive gifts like a Chanel bag, a Bottega Veneta bag, and even $20,000 for her to invest in her business. Quite significant support.
So how did the prosecution link the money to the idea of coercion? What was the argument there?
Their argument, based on the sources, was essentially that he was dangling these things over her head, using them as leverage to get her to perform certain sex acts.
Ah, okay.
And they brought up testimony about threats, too, specifically threatening to release sex tapes, or maybe more critically, threatening to stop paying that $10,000 rent if she didn't comply.
So framing that financial help as a weapon, basically.
It's a tool of control, yeah.
Yeah.
That seemed to be the core of their argument regarding the money.
Okay, prosecution's angle, but then the defense comes in, and they apparently use that exact same evidence, the money, the gifts, but to make the opposite case.
Right. And this is where it gets really striking looking at the reports. The defense absolutely focused on the gifts, the rent, the financial support.
But they framed it how?
Completely differently.
Yeah.
More like these were just benefits of the relationship she enjoyed, not necessarily tools of coercion. And the detail that really jumped out was the defense bringing up that Mr. Combs is still, right now, paying her attorney fees and her rent, even during this trial.
Wait, hang on. He's paying her rent and her legal fees while she's testifying against him in a federal trial.
That's what the testimony revealed, according to the sources.
How does the defense possibly use that?
Well, it seems like they're using it to muddy the waters on the coercion narrative. If she was purely a victim, completely forced, would he still be providing this level of financial support, even paying for her lawyers in this very case?
It complicates things.
It seems designed to challenge that idea that she was only ever trapped or unwilling. It raises questions, right?
It absolutely sets up this core conflict running through her testimony, this whole question, willing participant or coerced victim. And the sources show evidence pointing both ways, often from her own words or actions.
Exactly. And this is why it's so incredibly difficult to imagine for a jury. Because on one hand, you have the prosecution presenting evidence suggesting she clearly didn't want to do certain things.
Like the freak-offs?
Specifically those involving other men. She apparently said she only wanted to be with Diddy. The sources mentioned texts, even a voice note played in court.
What did they say?
Things like, I don't want to do it anymore, and I'm not a porn star, I'm not an animal, I need a break. Really direct statements of unwillingness.
And she testified about physical reactions too, like after these events.
Yes, she mentioned having outward reactions, including vomiting afterward. And she testified that Diddy's response was basically get on her job.
Wow.
She also described him flying her places constantly, 90% of the time, she estimated. Turks and Caicos, New York, Miami.
Yeah.
Specifically for these hotel nights, she said she felt forced into.
And she gave some really specific, almost chilling details about those hotel rooms.
She did. Dimly lit red lights, which the sources noted echoes some of Cassie Ventura's testimony.
Right.
Also, 24 bottles of baby oil per night, requirements about her hair needing to be in a ponytail, creamy white nails, and the clear involvement of escorts.
It paints a picture of something very orchestrated and demanding.
Definitely. Those details really add to the prosecution's narrative of control and lack of agency for her in those moments.
Okay, so you've got all that suggesting unwillingness, discomfort, being forced. But then the defense comes back with completely contradictory evidence.
Right. This is the other side of the coin the jury has to grapple with. The defense brought up text messages where, according to the sources, she was saying she was horny for him or wanted to get slutty and down and dirty.
Okay.
And maybe even more powerfully, the defense presented evidence audio messages, texts that seemed to show her scheduling escorts herself, or saying she actually loves spending time with them, being intimate with them.
She scheduled them herself. How does the defense use that?
Well, they seem to be using it to directly counter the idea she was just a passive victim with no say. If she's arranging encounters or saying she enjoys them in messages, it makes the pure coercion story much more complicated, doesn't it?
It really does. So she comes across as, well, a witness whose own reported words and actions seem to clash. A really complex, maybe tumultuous relationship, as one source put it.
Absolutely. Tumultuous, marked by jealousy. That's how the reports described it. And they also noted Diddy was apparently candid with her from the start, that he wasn't a one-woman man.
And the defense uses that context.
Seems like it. To frame the basic nature of the relationship, maybe suggesting she knew what she was getting into, even if parts of it became difficult for her later.
Did the defense also use Diddy's own words from voice notes?
Yes, they did. They played voice notes where he was reportedly telling her things like, "Move on," or "I want you not to live this way."
What was the point there?
The defense seemed to be suggesting that he might have wanted to change or end the dynamic, implying maybe she was the one choosing to stay in it, despite him telling her to move on.
And they also mentioned a past physical fight.
Yeah, they brought up one specific incident, a physical altercation, but they claimed both of them left safely afterward.
Their argument was?
That Diddy allowed her the space and opportunity to leave, even during a conflict.
Yeah.
Again, pushing back against the idea that she was completely trapped or unable to get out.
And one last thing the defense apparently brought up was a trip she took to Vegas just last year, without Diddy.
That's right, 2024. She went without him, but with another rapper and his wife. And according to the testimony presented by the defense, a freak-off happened on that trip too, with a male escort and another woman.
So the defense's point was
that she engaged in this kind of activity even when Diddy wasn't there, suggesting maybe she enjoyed or sought out this lifestyle independently. They even suggested, kind of ironically, that he got jealous about that Vegas incident.
Wow. Okay, so you look at all this, the prosecution's evidence, the defense's counter evidence, the texts, the actions, the money. It really highlights what attorney Justin Miller was saying in the sources.
Exactly. His analysis really nailed it. He talked about that fine line between coercion and just being part of this lifestyle.
And the jury's burden.
Yeah, he emphasized their incredibly tough job, deciding if these individuals are victims or willing participants or some mixture of the two. It's rarely simple.
He also mentioned the power dynamic, right? The money, the career influence.
Absolutely. How Diddy's control over things like rent money or career prospects creates this huge power imbalance that the jury just has to consider when they're thinking about whether consent was real or if it was coerced. It's not an even playing field.
And separate from the testimony, there was some legal maneuvering this week, another mistrial motion.
Yeah. The second time his team tried that this week, the sources explained the strategy there. It might not get granted now.
But it's for later.
Exactly. You have to make the objection, lodge your objection during the trial itself if you want to preserve that issue for a potential appeal if things don't go your way. It's a standard legal tactic.
Gotcha. And looking ahead, week 6, what might happen?
The report suggests the prosecution could rest its case in week 6, which would be a pretty big shift.
Meaning the focus would then turn to the defense's case.
Precisely.
And it's crucial we remember, as the sources always point out, Sean P. Diddy Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the federal charges.
Absolutely. That's the fundamental legal reality here. He maintains his innocence.
Okay, and finally, let's just quickly circle back to that Kanye West appearance. What were the specifics there?
Pretty brief, but yeah, notable. He showed up with Diddy's son, Christian King Combs. A reporter asked if he was there to support Diddy. He apparently gave a slow nod and just said, yes. So a quick moment of celebrity spotlight on the courthouse steps amidst all the really heavy testimony happening inside.
So wrapping up this deep dive on week 5, the
Hmm.
main takeaway really seems to be the sheer complexity that Jane Doe's testimony brought out.
Yeah, it just lays bare these completely conflicting stories the prosecution and defense are trying to tell. And they're both using pieces of her testimony, her texts, her actions, the financial ties.
All pointing in different
Right.
directions.
It all boils down to that incredibly difficult question for the jury. Was it coercion? Was it willing participation? Or is the truth somewhere tangled in between?
And this week's testimony, maybe more than anything else so far, really throws into sharp relief just how challenging that question is, especially when the evidence from the witness herself seems to point both ways.
Definitely. And as the trial moves forward, maybe shifting to the defense soon, it really leaves you thinking about Attorney Miller's point. How does a jury even begin to navigate testimony, this personal, this contradictory? How do they weigh all these conflicting pieces from one person and figure out where that line is actually drawn between a messy relationship, financial influence, and actual criminal coercion?
Yeah, something profound to consider as this trial continues.